Hello, welcome to day 26 of our 30-day challenge, The Art of Allowing. And guys, this wouldn't be a challenge if it was easy. It wouldn't be a challenge if it didn't push you to become someone new, to transform, to think, to acknowledge where you are and where you want to be, and to just acknowledge the gap. And as I'm speaking to you, day 26 is about the power of pausing, the power of reflection before reacting. And I'd like to share something that happened to me today. This morning when I woke up, I allowed something that my wife did to irritate me. And it wasn't the situation itself that irritated me. I guess it was a situation, but I allowed it to determine my response, and I responded in a negative way, which in turn affected her. And I allowed that to sort of influence the rest of my day. And instead of pausing, I reacted. And the reaction, it sort of turned into an outburst. And before I knew it, one moment became the dictator of the rest of my morning. And which is one of the reasons why this message was delayed, because I now am starting behind emotionally. And I know it's ironic. After 25 days of talking about allowing and surrendering, I still fell victim. And that's the lesson. Mastery is not necessarily measured by never being triggered. It's measured by how quickly can you recognize that you've left that place of peace, that you've left your center and returned to it. And I think one of the greatest misconceptions that we have is that spiritual growth means you've reached an ultimate state of nirvana and there's no more challenges, no more difficulty. And it doesn't. Growth doesn't eliminate triggers. It actually reveals them. It's the very places where we still react and we still have these emotional outbursts, those are the places that we're still attached. And the pause, being able to pause, is what exposes that attachment. And the interesting thing is certain people will trigger us and others won't. Have you ever noticed that a complete stranger can do the same thing and it barely affects you, but somebody you know, somebody you love and care about does the same exact thing and instantly triggers you and changes your emotional state of being? And why is that? And it's not because their actions are worse. It's the same thing, just by a different person. But I think it's because the person that we're close to, we have a different level of expectation for them. So we expect our husband or our wife to understand us. We expect our children to listen, but the neighbor's children, they're bad children. They don't have to listen. We expect our coworkers to think like us. We expect our employees to listen to exactly what we want them to do. We expect our friends to know us, to know better. So the trigger isn't the behavior all the time. Sometimes the trigger is a collision between reality and expectation. In other words, the trigger is them not doing or acting the way that we expected them to act. And so the event, what they did, is just a revelation of what was already happening within us. So in other words, people don't create our emotional state. They reveal it. Think about that. My emotional state wasn't created by this event. It was revealed. And it's the good old proverb of the orange. You squeeze an orange, you're going to get orange juice. Whether you squeeze it hard, whether you squeeze it in the desert, whether you squeeze it in Alaska, whatever's inside is going to come out when there's pressure. And so the pause that I'm referring to here is to allow that inner observer to observe and to sit with that feeling for long enough to then make the right decision. Because most of our suffering is not happening in the event. It happens in the seconds, the minutes between what happened and the story that I'm telling myself, that you're telling yourself about what just happened. They don't respect me. They don't appreciate me. They always do this. And those stories, they happen quickly. And so that pause, it interrupts that process, and you can now respond in truth. And that space is where the freedom is. And you can think, and you can look at what actually is happening. What assumptions am I making? Is my reaction really proportional to reality? Am I responding to this moment or to accumulated frustration from yesterday or from last week or from somebody else, from work? Is it pressure from work? And without the pause, our emotions become the master and we become the quote unquote prisoners. Without that pause, now we're getting information from the emotion as opposed to feeding the emotion information. And so when I say pause, I'm not necessarily saying to replay things, because reflection is not about replaying. It's about, what is it about actually? Reflection is asking, what is this moment really trying to teach me? And not necessarily, well, how could they have done this to me? Why is this happening to me? No, reflection turns every moment of anger, every moment of frustration, every moment of difficulty into a teacher. And the opposite is when we react. And that reaction is what turns every moment of anger and difficulty and frustration into the enemy. So for me, the thing that happened next, after I reacted, I apologized immediately, but that didn't take away what happened. And it didn't eliminate the need for us to actually discuss the issue later on today. And you got to be able to go into those conversations from a place of clarity instead of emotional captivity. And I think sometimes the most loving thing that you can do is to wait. Wait until your emotions no longer have the microphone. Wait until your emotions no longer have authority. And the lesson that I got today is allowing doesn't mean allowing people to mistreat you or walk over you. That's not what this is. But it just means allowing reality to be reality before deciding what wisdom requires next. Because sometimes wisdom is going to say, keep quiet. And sometimes wisdom is going to say, apologize. Sometimes wisdom is going to say, hey, put up this boundary or wait. But wisdom almost always begins with reflection, with a pause, with a moment of stillness. And so I know it's the end of the day, but if you're listening to this, before you make any important decision about responding to someone who offended you, who irritated you, who made you angry, pause. Before you respond to that text, pause. Before you correct someone at work or correct your spouse or your loved one, before you even defend yourself, take a minute, take a deep breath, and pause. Before you think you know what somebody meant, before you assume that you understood what their intentions were, pause and ask yourself, am I responding from a place of presence, or am I responding from a place of pain? Am I reacting from pain, from hurt, from irritation? Because I think the quality of our lives is sometimes going to be determined not by what happens to you, but by the space you create between what happens and how you choose to respond. Remember, reflection is not replaying what happened. Reflection is not going back into yesterday and revisiting it and saying, I can't believe they did that. It's not replaying yesterday. Reflection is reclaiming today. How do I get in right standing with God today? So pause and watch your life change.